The Rock, the Prince, and the Mermaid, How the Tides Came into Being, written by Julie Nicholson, inspired by Sage Nye, illustrated by various members of the Mackay family. A pretty little village called Blue Hill. It was in this town, in the far distant past, that the tides came. About midway along the coast of down east Maine lies a pretty little village called Blue Hill. It was in this town, in the far distant past, that the tides came into being. A lonely prince lived with his father and mother inside a mountain in Blue Hill, Maine. This kingdom was hot and fiery, with lakes of molten red lava and streams of melted gold. Though the kingdom was beautiful, it was hot and dry, with no passageway to the world beyond. The prince was happy there, except that he longed to venture out into where he could breathe the world's fresh air and see the clouds floating by, and where he could swim and cavort in the sea. He yearned to feel the refreshing cold water on his burning hot flesh. He wanted to splash in the water and wanted to make friends with the seals and the fish, so he begged his father to let him be free. His father was sad that his only son wanted to leave his kingdom, but he finally agreed, as long as his son accepted the following terms. He must return to his father's kingdom after a year and a day, otherwise he would have to breathe the earth's air for the rest of his life. And he must promise that he will never, ever fall in love. If he honored these things, he would be safe and happy. If he did not, the gods would make sure the prince would suffer a cruel and certain punishment. The prince readily agreed, and plans were made for the mountain to erupt in a huge volcanic explosion. There was a rumbling and a roar as the volcano split open the top of the mountain. The earth shook and lava flew up into the sky and soared through the air. Up, 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 and away went our prince, over the place where the thousands of years later the Penobscot Indians would feast upon the oysters on the banks of the mill stream. He flew past where Jonathan Fisher's Congregational Church would be built and where the schooners would sail in from Boston for timber. The prince hung tightly onto the special bit of lava that his father had given him. Lava cooled as it soared over the sparkling bay beneath and finally landed, thump, right in the middle of the bay, near what we now call the town rock. Oh, how happy the prince was as he felt the fresh, cooling air. He swam and cavorted with the seals. He danced and played with the mackerel. He made friends with the birds and the clams. He dined on bubbles and seaweed. He lay on the warm rocks in the sunshine, and he marveled at the white clouds swirling overhead. At night, our prince made friends with the wise old moon. He loved it when she sent down her silvery moonbeams at night to make his bay a magical fairyland. The moon became fond of the prince, and she saw that though he had made friends with the fish and the seals, he was lonely for a companion who was more like himself. Dear to the moon's heart was her beloved granddaughter, the Mermaid, who lived out by Cranberry Island off Mount Desert. Though the moon shared the sky with the sun and the stars, they were far away, and so the moon too knew the pain of loneliness. So she sent her granddaughter to play with the prince. Their favorite time of night was at night, when the moon sent moonbeams of silver down into the water. The prince and the mermaid loved these moonbeams and used them as seesaws and diving boards in their play together. And they did the forbidden thing. They fell in love. No, 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 groaned the mountain and the rock. The prince was not supposed to fall in love. The mountain shook in protest. The rock shivered and trembled in alarm. Lightning split the air. Trees lost their leaves and became witch-like at protest. The seagulls rose up in alarm, but no one had the power to stop the prince. Our prince loved his mermaid, and she loved him back. The day finally arrived when the prince had to return to his father's kingdom, else he would have to forever breathe the earth's air. But that meant giving up his beloved mermaid, who needed to be under the water to survive. Relinquish the mermaid and never see her again? No, no, no. He could never do that. So he told his father he would not return to the kingdom. The father was totally dismayed. What was he to do? But wait, as if by magic he had an idea. He suddenly realized that the rock in the middle of the bay was still a part of his fiery kingdom. It had been molten lava that came from inside his mountain. So if his son's spirit would move into the rock, his son would be returning to his father's kingdom, and he could still breathe Earth's air. But what about the mermaid? She needed deep water in which to survive, and the prince needed air. The mermaid wept and pleaded, and her tears turned to rain. The moon saw this rain and rushed to her granddaughter's side. "How can I help you, my dear granddaughter?" she asked. The mermaid answered, "I need to live under the water so I can breathe, but I want more than anything to be near my prince, who needs to breathe the earth's air." The wise old moon thought for a moment and finally asked, "Would you be willing to be with your prince for half the time, say for 6 hours and 13 minutes out of every 12 hours and 26 minutes? Because I am the mighty moon, and I could wave my magic wand and create the tides. I could draw the waters away from the rock for part of the day so that the prince can breathe, and then I can send the waters back so you can be under the water with your prince." So that's just what happened. The moon created the tides. At that very moment, a piece of driftwood in the cove stirred and turned and started to move out of the bay. The moon used her gravitational powers to pull the water past Sandy Island. Inch by inch, the water receded down the side of the prince's rock. Before long, the seaweed lay limp as though in sleep. Long-legged herons stalked clams on the mudflats. Hour by hour, the tide gushed past Sculpin Point, gathered momentum into the outer bay past Jim's Point on Long Island, draining the waters from the reversing falls for the very first time, before joining the ebbing waters of the Bay of Fundy. As the moon dipped over the western horizon, the waters followed her, creating high tide wherever she went, and leaving low tide where she had been. The prince breathed in the salt air and gave thanks. Rounding the earth and up from the other side, the moon rose over Mount Desert on the eastern horizon. The tide was coming in over the prince's rock. It was time for the prince to see his mermaid again. There she was, swimming joyfully toward him, borne on the incoming tide, past the reversing falls and past Sandy Island. The prince and the mermaid were together again, just the way life should be. Every time the tide is in and our rock is covered with water, the prince and his mermaid are happily together beneath the sea. Whenever our rock is exposed, our prince is breathing in the healthy air of Blue Hill, so he can welcome his mermaid when the tide comes in again. And so it was and will be forever, as long as the tides ebb and flow. Our prince will be with his mermaid, and his mermaid will be with her beau. The end. And it all started right here in Blue Hill, Maine. When next you see the rock, look carefully. The magic is there. What happened, I understand that the mermaid and the prince were married, and they went to Mars for their honeymoon, and they are driving that little golf cart called Curiosity. They're spending their honeymoon driving the golf cart around Mars. That's what I hear. But they'll be back next summer.